Hello, everyone. My name is Leon Gua, and I am the research coordinator for California Sea Grant. Today, I'll be providing a recorded overview of our California Mid-Depth Rocky Reef MPA Monitoring Request for Proposals, or RFP, as you'll often hear me abbreviate. Just a quick note that whenever you're watching this video, the information that's presented is accurate as of October 14th. However, the timeline and details of this particular call for proposals are subject to change. And so we always encourage that you refer to our website for the most up-to-date information. This includes if you decide to download or PDF our call, please always refer to our live website to ensure that you have the most up-to-date requirements and information. So in this presentation, I am going to go over a background of the California MPA network and the need for monitoring. We'll also provide an overview of the process in developing, as well as the organization of the new report that is very critical in determining the priorities of this particular funding call. So that report is titled Recommendations to Inform Monitoring Strategies for Mid-Depth Rocky Reef Habitats in California. And finally, we'll do a high-level walkthrough of the request for proposals and try to highlight any things that might be causes for questions for anyone who might be applying for this opportunity. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with the background information. So there are three main agencies in California that are responsible for the collaborative management of California's MPA network. So these include California Ocean Protection Council, or OPC. They are the lead agency for MPA policy and research and monitoring investments. There's also California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which we often abbreviate to CDFW, and they are the lead agency for MPA management in the state. And then finally, we have California Fish and Game Commission, and they are the regulatory and decision-making authority. So throughout today, you're going to hear me refer in particular to OPC and CDFW as our main partners in this particular funding solicitation. California's MPA network was established in 2012, and it includes 124 marine protected areas encompassing 16% of our state's waters, with 9% being no-take MPAs. Prior to the Marine Life Protection Act that stimulated the creation of this network, only 3% of the state's waters were protected, with less than 1% in a no-take reserve. Since 2017, OPC has funded almost $49 million to support the MPA programming, including over $32 million for MPA ecological monitoring. California Sea Grant began working with OPC and CDFW to administer baseline monitoring in 2007, followed by the first set of long-term monitoring projects in 2019. So there are a number of long-term monitoring projects that have been ongoing since that baseline monitoring, and these groups help track the ecological effects of marine protected areas, and they focus on certain critical habitats, including the rocky intertidal, kelp forests and rocky reefs, mid-depth rocky reefs, deep habitats, sandy beach, estuaries, as well as human uses. This monitoring is critically important. Not only are these habitat groups tracking the effect of MPAs on our ecological communities, but they're also providing management and monitoring recommendations, which is a foundational component to adaptive management. One element of the way that the state is doing adaptive management for MPAs includes the first comprehensive MPA decadal management review. This was completed in 2023 and led to a number of products and recommendations for next steps. This decadal management review included an analysis of baseline and long-term monitoring through 2021 and resulted in technical reports on MPA performance across the core habitats. From that 10-year review assessment, it was Identifying robust and durable monitoring approaches for mid-depth habitats became a key management recommendation. Monitoring this particular habitat is one of the greatest challenges technologically, logistically, and economically. And since 2004, the state's monitoring program has really relied heavily on remotely operated vehicles or ROV strip transect methods. And there has been a well-established substantial time series across the statewide MPA network. However, it has been challenging to evaluate the effectiveness of that monitoring due to various circumstances and challenges over recent years. So, stemming from this finding, OPC and CDFW sought independent science-based recommendations to inform their monitoring approach for mid-depth habitats moving forward. They decided to partner with California's Sea Grant to assemble and facilitate a technical expert panel. These panelists are comprised of experts on mid-depth habitats, approaches, and analytical methods, and were independent from the research that has already been done in California on this particular habitat. So California Sea Grant itself worked with the panelists to facilitate panel discussions and drafting of a report that would synthesize key findings and recommendations to inform OPC and CDFW's long-term mid-depth monitoring strategy. Those recommendations are also the basis for many of the priorities in the mid-depth monitoring funding call that is the primary focus of today's presentation. So I'll just briefly highlight how we went through this technical expert panel process or TEP process. So first, all of the panelists were provided a virtual binder as well as provided the opportunity to share any additional resources they thought were relevant to this particular issue and were afforded about a month to digest the data sets, digest the literature, and begin thinking about key guiding questions that I'll be sharing with you very shortly. We then met with all of the panelists to discuss those key finding questions and recommendation questions and come to a consensus on what those should be as a panel. We worked together to then outline the report as well as leads for different sections. The panelists then wrote the report mostly asynchronously, although we had several meetings to discuss any points that needed more refinement. And California Sea Grant also provided some review of the reports while they were in progress, just to ensure if there's anything that required more clarification, more detail, that we were able to highlight that for the panelists as they were writing. And then the panel worked to polish the report based on that feedback and submitted that to California Sea Grant for copy editing and any final needs for revision. And then finally, that report was delivered to OPC and CDFW. The panel was provided a number of things that helped frame their discussion. So these included these following monitoring objectives, which are the same objectives that are listed in the call for proposals. So these monitoring objectives for the MPA network include one, evaluating MPA performance statewide and within the network's three bioregions, North, Central, and South. Two, to inform ecological connectivity modeling. Three, to assess and address climate change impacts. And four, to incorporate non-fisheries and non-biological environmental monitoring. They were also provided the following monitoring priorities. And so these included one, describing broad ecosystem scale species composition of fishes, invertebrates, and biogenic habitat. Two, obtaining accurate and repeatable estimates of abundance, density, and biomass for key species that are comparable across other habitat monitoring groups. Three, generating length composition data for key species with adequate sample size to examine age structure and calculate biomass metrics. And four, characterizing habitat in an ecologically meaningful way, both on a macro and micro scales, and evaluating species habitat association. The panel was also provided a list of 6 guiding questions that OPC and CDFW wanted their input on, and again, helped craft the basis for all following panel discussions and the final report. So these included 3 guiding questions about key findings. So what survey tools, methods, sampling designs, and analytical approaches would provide the most accurate and replicable results to meet this monitoring priority for California MPA network mid-depth habitats. And the monitoring priorities alluded to here are the ones I just shared with you. 2, what are the utility, effectiveness, cost considerations, and complementary nature of the approaches identified in question 1 with regard to fulfilling monitoring priorities? And 3, how can OPC and CDFW best evaluate cost efficiency and effectiveness among these survey tools, methods, sampling designs, and analytical approaches? And here are the remaining 3 questions that generated recommendations. So, given the monitoring priorities and your key findings, what are the core components of a comprehensive monitoring strategy that will address monitoring objectives? And again, the objectives are the ones that were just shared with you. How can historical methods and data sets be best incorporated to ensure existing time series are comparable with new and additional approaches from the key findings? And finally, what emerging technologies and innovative analytical approaches, such as artificial intelligence, could potentially complement or substitute for the approaches recommended above? So the final report is available and linked through the RFP itself, and it is a key resource for the funding solicitation. And this just is a screenshot of the table of contents, and you'll find that it very closely follows the key questions, the guiding questions that I just shared with you. So now we're going to move on to an overview of the request for proposals itself. So this particular funding call is seeking projects that will advance monitoring priorities for California's mid-depth MPA rocky reef habitats, as well as evaluate sampling designs and approaches for long-term monitoring in this habitat. These are 2-year awards to cover the 2025 and 2026 monitoring seasons. And the start date of the funding is approximately May 1st, 2025. So just to give an overview of the timeline, there's a much more detailed timeline in the solicitation itself, but here's some critical dates we want to highlight for you. First is that in order to be eligible to submit a full proposal for this opportunity, you have to submit a notice of intent. This is due on November 13th by 5 p.m. Pacific time to sgproposal@ucsd.edu. It is not an evaluated notice of intent, as in we're not going to have reviewers or our administrative team look at it to tell you whether we're recommending or discouraging you to continue in the process. But it does help us understand how many people are applying and what they're generally expecting to be putting together in their full proposal. For those that submit a notice of intent, the full proposal will be due on December 16th at 5 p.m. Pacific time via eSeaGrant, which is our online application portal. These proposals will be reviewed by at least 4 external subject matter experts, and they will use evaluation criteria that is listed in the RFP to evaluate all proposals. And just a quick note here, we will only provide access to individuals who have submitted a notice of intent to eSeaGrant, just to ensure that only eligible applicants are taking the time to put together these full proposals. Finally, I'll just mention that the expected timeline for notification after the review and selection period would be early February 2025. And anyone who is in consideration for being selected may get an email from us with requests for potential budget or scope of work revisions. That would be a negotiation process between the project team and the administrators. But it may be necessary in some cases, just given that we have a limited funding pool. And again, just a note that the evaluation criteria are listed in the RFP. So, as far as requirements, again, these are all detailed in the RFP itself, but for the notice of intent, these must include the name of the lead investigator, their affiliation and contact information, names of collaborators, title of the project, approximate funding to be requested, and a brief narrative discussion, which should not be longer than 500 words. The full proposal has all the formatting guidelines and page limits listed in the RFP itself. And again, it is submitted through EC Grant. There are a number of components in this, so it is important that you do take time to look at these requirements and ask us if you have any questions about them. These include an institutional cover page, which requires signatures from your institution's fiscal representative. There's a lot of things that are pretty typical for applications, including project summaries, a project narrative. We're asking for information about your project team's experience and qualifications, as well as the CVs. We have sections requesting your current and pending support information. There is a budget narrative. There's optional to submit support letters as part of this. We require a data management plan, a CEQA form, as well as an accessibility plan, and there is an optional demographics questionnaire for you to fill out as well. We do have a Excel budget workbook available to help you in preparing for submitting the budget, but just note that you do have to enter and submit your budget through the EC Grant budget forms. These evaluation criteria that will be used by the reviewers are listed, as I said before, in the RFP itself. So all projects that are funded must address the priorities of this request for proposals. And these evaluation criteria are a helpful way for you when you're preparing your proposal to ensure that you're giving us the information that will help the reviewers evaluate your proposal. So these include project rationale, relevance, and utilization. So the degree to which the project is addressing the mid-depth monitoring objectives, priorities, and project components, as well as integrating with existing data and supporting continued ecological monitoring of mid-depth rocky habitats in California's MPA network. The second is scientific merit or innovativeness, and this is how well the project will advance monitoring priorities of California's mid-depth MPA habitats through use of robust state-of-the-art methods. And then we also have qualifications of investigators, project costs and justification, and just a note here that this is assessing whether the project costs are appropriate for the scope of work that's proposed, as well as how well the budget maximizes cost efficiency in sampling and post-processing approaches. And finally, community engagement and data, which is how well outreach and partnerships with local communities are integrated to the project or broaden the participation of underrepresented groups in STEM. So the evaluation criteria are used by the technical reviewers to score and provide comments on the proposals themselves. And then that information provided by external independent sources is then used by California Sea Grant, OPC, and CDFW to determine who is going to be selected for funding. So we will use rank order based on the evaluation criteria unless there are other reasons that we can use to justify to select projects out of rank order, such as availability of funding, balance or distribution of funds, duplication of projects funded by our different programs, program priorities and policy factors, the applicant's prior award performance, as well as partnerships with um, diverse groups, mentors, and underrepresented communities. Now I want to get in a little deeper into the components that you can apply for in this particular call for proposals. So the first component are the monitoring projects. So this means implementing a mid-depth rocky reef monitoring program during the 2025 and 2026 monitoring seasons. These proposals in this component may request a maximum of $1.2 million, which must include indirect costs if you are charging them. And awardees are expected to coordinate closely with management agencies, California Sea Grant, and other funded monitoring teams. And that should be built into the scope of work and budget itself. The second component is focused on investigating and refining sampling design and approaches to mid-depth rocky reef monitoring. So these proposals can request a maximum of $300,000 to include indirect costs, if any. And again, awardees are expected to coordinate closely with OPC, CDFW, California Sea Grant, and other funded teams. In the call for proposals, you will see information listed about what each of these components should include in your proposal themselves. And we just want to highlight here that each of these sections have grounding in the report that I highlighted earlier to you. So I'm highlighting what sections you could refer to, and I highly recommend that you read the report in its entirety, but in particular, pay attention to sections that help lead to the recommendations or the priorities that we have for this funding call. So for the monitoring programs, we are seeking survey tools and methods that will generate area swept density, length composition, habitat assessment, and maintain comparability with existing time series of data that are available. And if you look at this section of the report, you'll see that the primary approach in this section is recommending stereo camera equipped mobile platforms, as well as potentially a secondary approach that can complement the primary monitoring approach, which is using stationary platforms. So we've already received this question, just to be clear, both of these approaches can be proposed. We are seeking proposals that will best address the priorities that are listed in this funding call. Next is looking for sampling designs that are stratified minimally by habitat depth and type to divide the sampling frame into discrete strata areas over which MPA performance metrics will be calculated and evaluated. Sampling designs that allow both design-based and model-based analytical approaches, account for spatial autocorrelation, and include, but are not restricted to, sites sampled in existing mid-depth rocky reef long-term data sets. So this has multiple sections in the report as far as how they relate to the recommendations. So again, I encourage you to read through those and why these bullets for sampling designs are part of our funding priorities. Next, we are seeking that people utilize best practices and standardized protocols for data collection, post-processing, conditioning, and sharing. And these are described in components 6 and 7 of the report recommendation section regarding standardized protocols and data curation. And finally, for this component, we're seeking an estimate of monitoring, survey, and post-processing cost metrics by bioregion, broken out by MPA and sampling sites if costs differ by site. For component 2, we are seeking that refinement and investigation of sampling design. And so this includes, we're seeking proposals that can do as much of this as possible, these bullets. And so this might include identification of relevant sampling strata that would be maintained and included in long-term monitoring studies, and identifying identifications of data gaps in these strata. And evaluating trade-offs for cost-efficient and statistically robust levels of sampling effort versus temporal repetition. These two bullets you'll see a lot more information on in the report. in sections 2.3.2 and 3.2.3. We also would like exploration of shifting towards spatially balanced, stratified random sampling designs that would allow for model-based exploration of explanatory factors, such as fishing effort, environmental and oceanographic shifts, and spatial autocorrelation. And then the last piece is to examine and utilize appropriate modeling approaches to help accomplish the above elements of component two. And you'll find more information in the sections that are listed here about these last two bullets. That concludes our just recorded overview that hopefully provides a little more insight or at least narration on how this RFP came together based on the report. We welcome you to join us at the office hours that are listed in the RFP. We'll also have a proposal assistance webinar where we'll essentially walk you through the different components of the full proposal just to ensure that everything makes sense and that you're not caught by surprise for some of the things that are required. And you can always email us at sgproposal@ucsd.edu. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.